It is a huge humanitarian crisis.
Tuberculosis, chickenpox, lice.
These are the refugees who don't run from the Border Patrol, they run to them.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
While they're down there, I would build a double fence because all
The real wall. It's going to be a wall that's powerful and that people aren't going to be going under or up.
USA! USA! Fight in America!
If you can fight in America!
He's been president for 5.5 years. When is he going to take responsibility for something?
Because the United States is run by stupid people. We have stupid leadership.
Again, illegal immigrants.
Well, nobody knows the number, but the answer is, you just said it. They're illegal immigrants. They're here illegally.
One of the largest mass deportations in modern history. He's talking about...
Sí, inglés, lo hablo muy bien, muy perfectamente. Usted no me tiene que decir con rebolico ese que no lo hablo bien.
How dare you say that to me?
I think he's hijacked the debate. I think he's a wrecking ball for the future of the Republican Party with the Hispanic community.
The United States, Aaron, is like a dumping ground for the world's problems.
Occurred in a long time, since the Know Nothing Party.
This man scares me.
Total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal.
And segregation forever.
You hear a lot about what these guys are against. They seem to be against just about everything, but what are they for? If you unite behind a man you don't believe in, it's a lie.
So as a first step, all Japanese were required to move from critical areas such as these.
As we grapple with our current immigration issues, it's worth noting that past controversies over immigration policy in America bear startling similarities to the situation we face today.
Excuse me, folks, you are obstructing the roadway. Please get out of the roadway. You're obstructing America, officer.
You're probably going to have terrorists coming from the Middle East. Somebody said, oh, we don't have terrorists. They don't even know because they don't know who's coming. So we have this open border. It's a sieve. It's like water pouring through. People are coming in by the hundreds of thousands. We have no idea who's coming in.
250 years ago, Benjamin Franklin worried that a heavy influx of German-speaking immigrants pouring into Pennsylvania would then undermine the English-speaking settlers' politics and social norms. 160 years ago, millions of Americans feared that the heavy immigration of a foreign and inferior race, the Irish, would undermine the Anglo-Saxons' cultural traditions, heritage, and customs. 130 years ago, American working men in San Francisco fought to kick out Chinese immigrants who were willing to do brutal work for lower wages. Did any of these immigration threats destroy the Republic or the fabric of America? Yet controversy continues to surround the immigration of more recent arrivals. There have been 4 great waves of immigration in American history. The first wave began in the colonial period with the creation of Jamestown in the 1600s, peaking in the years preceding the American Revolution. The greatest single source of newcomers or immigrants during this period did not come from Europe, but from Africa, as the slave trade outpaced European settlement. Between 1525 and 1886, one of the most horrific atrocities in human history occurred with the slave trade and the forced immigration of millions of slaves from Africa to the New World. According to the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, 12.5 million Africans were shipped to the New World. 10.7 million survived the dreaded Middle Passage, disembarking in North America, the Caribbean, and South America. Let us not forget, as the Europeans were dehumanizing Africans and supplying slave labor for mega sugar plantations in the Americas, African leaders were also complicit in this brutal system by capturing other Africans, enslaving them to be sold away forever.
And the effects of this crime against humanity is still being felt to this day.
The second great wave of immigrants came in the middle decades of the 19th century.
The United States experienced a great wave of immigration that began in the late 1830s and continued through the 1840s into the 1860s. During that period, 4.5 million immigrants came to the United States, very largely from Ireland, from the German states, from Scandinavia. There was great concern on the part of many Americans with the arrival of these immigrants because many of the Irish and German were Roman Catholics, and this was a nation that after all had twin roots, the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment. And there were many Protestants in the United States who feared these Roman Catholics and feared that the Pope would attempt to seize control of the United States. Moreover, the Irish were poor. The Irish were often viewed as diseased. A major cholera epidemic in 1832 was blamed on the Irish. And so, throughout the 1840s and 1850s, there's a good deal of anti-Catholicism, anti-Irish feeling, and a good bit of that began to seep into American political life.
As immigration from Europe increased in the early 1800s, citizens who had been born in the U.S. began to feel resentment at the new arrivals. Those opposed to immigrants became known as nativists. Nativism, opposition to immigration to America, often embraced negative racial and ethnic stereotypes of Irish.
Irish were looked upon as, though they weren't physically, but they were depicted as short, hairy, ugly individuals, often looking ape-like. What's interesting about that is that depictions of African Americans were often ape-like, people swinging from trees, and the Irish were depicted racially in a similar kind of way.
The Irish have been known as the niggers of Europe.
Okay.
That's what, yeah.
Okay.
Because we were, basically, most Irish came to the United States in the mid-18th century after the potato famine, because potatoes were rotting in the ground, and this was basically the staple food of most Irish peasants.
Every great surge in immigration in American history has generated a corresponding surge in nativism, opposition to immigration, on the grounds that an influx of foreigners will marginalize the English language, undermine American culture, destabilize American politics, and weaken the economic status of American workers.
Anybody who saw gangs in New York knows the history of the Irish race.
Violent encounters between immigrants and native-born Americans would occur in American cities in the 1830s and early 1840s. In July 1844, riots broke out in the city of Philadelphia. Nativists battled Irish immigrants, and a Catholic church and 2 Catholic schools were burned down by mobs. At least 20 people were killed in the mayhem. Also, on August the 8th, 1855, in Louisville, Kentucky, on Election Day, Protestant mobs attacked Irish Catholic neighborhoods. These riots grew out of the bitter rivalry between the Democrats and the nativist Know Nothing Party.
By the 1850s, there is a party, first called the Native American Party and then simply the American Party, but it operated under the nickname of Know Nothing. And the reason why was because those who were members of the organization, when they were asked, what do you believe in politically, who do you oppose, what's your political agenda, would often say simply, I know nothing.
Multiple street fights raged, leaving 22 people dead and scores injured, and much property destroyed by fire. Only 5 people were later indicted, but none were convicted, and the victims were never compensated. This event was known as Bloody Monday. Did this perceived threat destroy the fabric of the Republic? In 1849, the California Gold Rush brought migrants from around the world. This included the first substantial influx of Chinese population in the United States. This influx of Chinese immigration culminated in the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the first systematic federal legislation to restrict free and open immigration to the country. The third wave in the last 2 decades of the 19th century, 1880s to 1930, and the first 2 decades of the 20th century, when millions of so-called new immigrants came from Southern and Eastern Europe. This influx, mostly Catholics and Jews, generated a massive nativist backlash, which led to strict limitations on immigration in the 1920s. By the late 1880s, steam power had shortened the journey to America drastically. Immigrants poured in from around the world, from the Middle East, the Mediterranean, and down from Canada. Between 1880 and 1930, over 27 million people entered the U.S. through Ellis Island. During the 1880s through 1930, both Jews and Italian immigrants were subject to extreme prejudice, racism, and in many cases, violence. During this time, both groups were seen as non-Anglo and non-white. In fact, Italian Americans were the second most likely ethnic group to be lynched. After the American Civil War, during the labor shortage, as the South converted to free labor, planters in the southern states recruited Italians to come to America, mainly to work in agriculture as laborers. Many soon found themselves the victims of prejudice, economic exploitation, and sometimes violence. Italian stereotypes abounded during this period as a means of justifying this maltreatment. One of the largest mass lynchings in American history was of 11 Italians in New Orleans in 1891. In 1899, in Tallulah, Louisiana, 3 Italian shopkeepers were lynched because they gave equal status to blacks who were in their shops. A vigilante mob lynched 5 Italians, 3 shopkeepers, and 2 bystanders. Did this perceived threat destroy the fabric of the Republic? In 1939, there was a great deal of anti-Semitism in the U.S. In June of 1939, a shipload of Jewish refugees on the cruise ship the St. Louis was prohibited from entering into the U.S. Many of those returned to Europe only to suffer from the Holocaust.
There's, of course, a ship called the St. Louis. And the St. Louis was captained by a guy named Schroeder. It was a ship that belonged to the Hamburg America line. People paid for passage on the ship, and they transported approximately 900 Jewish refugees.
It may be too simplistic to consider this a nativist response to this refugee situation. However, anti-Semitism, like nativism, are both aspects of racism.
The fourth wave of immigration occurred in 1965, when new legislation lifted those restrictions that were imposed during the 1920s. However, immigration today is dominated for the first time since the colonial period by non-Europeans. And the vast majority of these new immigrants are hailing from Latin America and Asia. Since the late 1960s, more than 30 million foreign citizens and their descendants have been added to the local communities and labor pools in the U.S. It is the numerical equivalent of having located within our borders the entire present population of all Central American countries. The first significant influx of Latino immigrants occurred during the California Gold Rush, just after the most modern boundary between the U.S. and Mexico was established after the end of the Mexican-American War, 1846 through 48. Growth of the nation's Hispanic population are two of the most controversial developments in the recent history of the U.S., expanding from a small regionally concentrated population of fewer than 6 million in 1960 to now a dispersed population of more than 50 million. Latinos are destined to exert enormous impact socially, culturally, politically, and economically in the U.S. Immigration crises, erupting like long dormant volcanoes every few years, have redefined what immigrant means in the U.S. These crises cause us to react in deeply personal ways, forging our opinions on what laws we want and don't want.
Get the fuck out of here! Our country, motherfucker! Our country! Proud fucking American! Made in USA, bitch! Made in fucking USA!
The latest immigration crisis to hit the U.S. is the tidal wave of tens of thousands of Central American children surging to our borders, looking for protection from the abuse they are suffering in their countries. News coverage of their arrival spiked in July of 2014 and sparked scores of protests across the country.
Think about having to abandon everything that you love and you know. Add to that the language barrier and distance and poverty. And you still make the risk because the hope that you're gonna find a better place to live and to raise your family, the risk that it takes you to get there, it's worth it compared to the situation that you're in.
I think quite a few of those kids are trying to escape like a real serious situation down in Guatemala, down in Salvador, situations that are in part a product of policies we've had in the United States. And so obviously, you can't let every kid stay here, but I think we should actually make a real effort to identify kids who are trying to seek asylum and give them that asylum.
I think that everyone is entitled to come to America and live here, but I think there has to be some rules and regulations that go along with it, that's all.
Politically, immigration reform, even though seen as necessary, has been extremely polarizing and difficult to achieve. On January the 28th, 2013, a bipartisan group of 8 senators, known as the Gang of 8, announced principles for implementing comprehensive immigration reform.
We are here to announce that 8 senators from opposite sides of the political aisle are coming together on a common-sense immigration reform proposal that we believe can pass the Senate.
The senators include Charles Schumer, New York, Dick Durbin, Illinois, Bob Menendez, New Jersey, Michael Bennet, Colorado, and Republicans John McCain, Arizona, Lindsey Graham, South Carolina, Marco Rubio, Florida, and Jeff Flake, Arizona. The bill was sent to the U.S. House of Representatives, where the bill has not been brought to the floor for debate or an up or down vote and has virtually died.
The path to citizenship is tough, but it is accessible. Yes, our bill does secure the border first, but it treats the situation of those living in the shadows as an equally urgent priority.
The Immigration Reform Bill was a product of bipartisan cooperation among Senate lawmakers, business groups, labor unions, agricultural interests, and immigration advocates who negotiated many compromises, resulting in an acceptable system. Yet, because of the political opposition from the far right and their current nativist attitudes, this bill has died.
One of the things that the Obama administration has done, because as you know, Congress has failed to enact any meaningful or comprehensive immigration reform. So one of the things that the Obama administration has tried to do is break off little chunks of it. And the president has done a number of executive actions which would benefit certain groups of people.
Another component of the immigration reform issue is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, also known as DACA. DACA is a memorandum authorized by the Obama administration on June 15, 2012.
So that was a program in which the president said that we are going to allow certain young illegal immigrants. They have to be a certain age, they have to have been here a certain number of years. Obviously they can't have broken any other laws, they can't be criminals, but if they can prove that they have a good record, that they're in college or school or have a job, that they would be able to apply for not permanent legal status, but temporary legal status.
Under the DACA program.
That's right, and so that's one of the things that he's done. He's done others as well, and that's helped a little bit. There are a lot of countries in the world that are poor, that are violent, and that have lots of crime. The question is, who do you help?
However, a grant for deferred action does not confer lawful immigration status, alter an individual's existing immigration status, or provide a pathway to citizenship. The creation of the policy came after the failed attempt to pass the DREAM Act, a bill that would have granted conditional permanent residency to qualifying undocumented immigrant students and those serving in the military. After the success of passing DACA came the demanding process. Those who are chosen are picked on a case-by-case basis. The main relief for these beneficiaries is the 2-year deportation reprieve they receive.
Yes, on 2012, I got DACA, which is a working permit, and my husband, he's eligible for TAPA. So right now, he's undocumented and he can get deported at any time. It's an everyday thing that you don't know what's gonna happen. I have to call them in the morning, at noon, to know if he's doing okay. Our kids, they know their dad is undocumented, so they are afraid sometimes. He's afraid of trouble, of going out of the state of New Mexico. So coming here was a big step of saying, I'm not gonna be afraid and I'm gonna keep fighting for DAPA, so he will be able to have a decent job.
As with most immigration reform policies, nearly all Republicans in the House of Representatives, along with 3 Democrats, voted 224 to 201 to defund DACA in June 2013. Lead author of the amendment to defund DACA, Representative Steve King of Iowa, explained, "The point here is the president does not have the authority to waive immigration law, nor does he have the authority to create it out of thin air, as he's done both with these memos in this respect."
I think it's a lot of fear-mongering by politicians who are appealing to people who are worried about things in the world. I look around Washington, D.C. We have a lot of immigrants here, as you know.
I have not heavy feelings about it, but I do definitely have thoughts about it. And my thoughts are, conservatively, that the U.S. has been paying into the U.S. system for hundreds of years, and that folks can just come on in and enjoy our stuff for free is a little bit illogical. However, there's also the fact that our country has been going south for over 40 years, and that we need all the friends we can get.
Closely, but sounds horrible. The country, if you know your history, it used to let everybody in, then it cut off immigration in 1920, I think, and then the stinking McCarran Act in 1950 was terrible. So we like people and we have plenty of room and there's plenty of economy, and so they should let people in.
We need to make sure that we're not just allowing anyone to come in the country, and we need to recognize that we do have social support systems that support all people who are in this country, including those who are here illegally. And if we're not keeping track of the numbers that are here or the people who are here, it's going to be a drain on our resources, and we're not going to be able to support those communities and support those people to be productive members of our society.
In 1970, large-scale Haitian immigration to the U.S. began when Haitians attempting to escape Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier's dictatorship sailed for the U.S. Before 1977, about 7,000 boat people had arrived in the U.S. By 1979, 8,300 more had arrived. U.S. policy decided that Haitians were not political refugees, but economic immigrants seeking jobs and better living conditions, making them ineligible for asylum. Thus, no Haitians were given refugee status, and every Haitian landing in the U.S. was subject to immediate deportation. Today, the Obama administration has deported tens of thousands of undocumented immigrants, simultaneously pushing for and supporting immigration reform.
First, you have to be caught. You can get caught various different ways, by making a wrong turn, by breaking the law another way. This is a particularly unfortunate scenario, and it happens a lot, particularly with men from Central America. They get drunk, they get in a car, they get stopped by the police, and they get arrested for drunk driving. So a large number of deportations are of drunk drivers. You have to get in trouble to get in trouble, right? So let's say you, for whatever reason, you come to the attention of the authorities, and it's found that you are in the country illegally. You can be then referred to immigration authorities, you can be taken into custody. Then several things happen. One, the immigration authorities themselves have the right or the authority to let you go. If you're a child, if you're a mother with small children, if you've got some sort of very serious problem, they have the authority to say, okay, you can go free, you can go home, but you are still under a deportation order and you have to appear in court.
The rate of deportation swelled, hitting a record in the 2012 fiscal year with more than 400,000 removals, and nearly a quarter of the total deportations between July 2010 and the end of September 2012 involved parents of children who were American citizens.
America has always survived every perceived immigration threat, and the Republic has prospered because of the contributions of so many to the American fabric.
Since immigration reform has died under Republican control, and as the immigration situation continues to spiral toward an uncertain destiny, remaining steeped in political controversy, all of this forces us to revisit those words which have been immortalized, which has made the United States of America a beacon of light for the world. Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shores. Send these homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
And by the way, I know it doesn't sound nice, but not everything is nice. It doesn't sound practical. Has to do it.
The question remains, is this how we really think and feel about our immigration situation today? Or has current nativism forced us to forget that we are an immigration nation?